Thank you everybody for joining us today. This is the second session of our X4D virtual series. And for those of you who weren't able to join last time, just a quick kind of recap of why we're doing this. So our sense, Akhil Mathur, who's also here, and me, we kind of have been talking for a while, within the ICT4D space, and then more generally looking at technology and social change. There's a lot of kind of areas of intersection, and there's a lot of learning that can be facilitated across, various domains that people are looking at and that they care about. And so we wanted to have, conferences tend to bring people who are part of a community together, and so we get to have kind of more close-knit ties. And this was sort of the inverse of that in a way, to kind of try to engage voices that we don't always hear from. And especially, if it's a in-person conference, it's going to take a lot to kind of get all of us there, in terms of just money and time, and different people have different priorities. And so this was, I guess, a good affordance of kind of being in this situation, right? Trying to have these virtual conversations with folks who have a lot to say that we can all learn from, but we don't necessarily get to speak to them in the same kind of time and place. And so when we did a survey back in April or May to kind of see who was interested in having these conversations and what they wanted to hear from, or who they wanted to hear from, then the most popular kind of response was Feminist Perspectives and Technology Design. So that's why we picked this as kind of our first focus conversation. The first session that we had was more generally speaking to the different communities that are at this intersection. And so I'm really super excited to introduce to you, we have 5 speakers, 4 talks, and they come from very different spaces, trying to have impact in the circles that they speak to in really wonderful ways. And so we have Catherine Gignazio, who's been doing work in urban science and planning, and has co-written the book Data Feminism. And we're going to start with her, and then we'll hear from Nassim, Parvin, who wrote this wonderful article on unintended consequences. That is, I think, a must read for all of us. But even before that, she's been doing really amazing work that I've learned a lot from. And so this is, I think, a great introduction to her scholarship. And then we hear from Shaowen Bardzell, who I don't think, there's anyone here who doesn't know about the feminist HCI paper, but then also, for many years since, she's been doing really kind of groundbreaking work in the HCI and design space. And then in the end, we're going to hear from 2 co-founders of Aara Health, which is a new social enterprise looking at women's health in India in particular. So we're really super, super excited to hear from you all. And thank you, Catherine, for setting up this Zoom for us. Last time, we were using an account that shut people off if we had reached 100, and we hadn't really expected to reach 100. So it was a nice problem to have, but this time we should be able to accommodate more. Okay. So it's 11:05, we're gonna get started. So Catherine, why don't you share your screen now? And please use chat liberally. That's what we did last time, where we were drawing questions from chat, and there were conversations happening there. And then at the end of all of the 4 talks, we'll come back to some of those questions.
Neha, you see the slide?
Yes.
Okay, good. Wonderful. So, sorry, let me just find my window. Okay, there we go. So yeah, hi everybody. Thank you to Neha for the really kind invitation to talk with you today. I'm just really honored to be part of the series, and I'm really excited to hear the other presentations. So I'm an assistant professor of urban science and planning in the Department of Urban Studies and Planning at MIT. And I'm going to talk a little bit today about both the book that Neha referenced, Data Feminism, and then some work that's emerging from that on feminicide data collection. So I just want to make clear, so the book just came out really, and right as COVID came out, so March 2020, we canceled our book tour, but then we did lots of online book events to sort of celebrate it. And I just want to mention that it's in collaboration with Lauren F. Klein, who's down previously at Georgia Tech, now at Emory University in Atlanta. Oh, and the book is open access, so there's a link here so you can go and read it just online for free. So sort of where data feminism comes from, we see data feminism as part of a growing body of work that's trying to hold corporate and government actors accountable for their racist, sexist, and classist data products. So probably in this audience, you've heard of these kinds of things. So things like face detection systems that can't see women of color, hiring algorithms that demote women applicants, search algorithms that circulate negative stereotypes about Black girls, child abuse detection algorithms that publish poor parents, data visualizations that reinforce the gender binary, all of these kinds of things. And, you know, we see this encapsulated in many ways in what is the status quo of working with data science. And this quote, which I really think of as a meme, this data is the new oil. So this is like a kind of a meme that's been circulated mainly in sort of business executive kinds of circles. It was coined by The Economist magazine, but like there's a lot that's encapsulated by that, by data being the new oil, meaning like data is something that we can extract, we can mine, we can process, and then by doing so, we can turn it into profit. But then like the question is always like, from the feminist perspective, is always for whom? So who is benefiting and who is being harmed? And this is where we see this like really growing wave of pushback in the last 5 years. Oops. And I put some of our kind of most inspiring, the works that we've been most inspired by here at the bottom, but we see this pushback coming in the form of like, no, data is the same old oppression. We are reinscribing the status quo, and indeed even like making the status quo sort of worse in terms of inequality using data science, computation, and algorithms. And so we, what we bring into this emerging kind of pushback conversation is a focus on feminism and on intersectional feminism in particular. And we like to be kind of really explicit about kind of how we ground feminism, because feminism, there are many feminisms and they're not all compatible with each other. So we see feminism as, first of all, a belief in the equality of all genders, action. So activism to take action towards achieving that equality. And then thirdly, as this really amazing and rich intellectual heritage that we can use to guide us towards making a more equitable world. And then specifically, when we're drawing on feminism, we're thinking of an intersectional feminism in particular, because cis white feminism based in the global north has had many, many exclusions. And so we like to be very kind of specific about the definition. And so when we are kind of the definition that we're mobilizing in the book is intersectional feminism as it's been formulated by US Black feminism. And so I probably don't really have to explain intersectionality to this audience, but briefly, intersectionality is this term coined by the legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw. And she uses intersectionality to explain how social inequality cannot be explained by only one dimension of difference, such as gender. So when we are talking about inequality or talking about oppression, we must talk about the intersection of things that produce it. So certainly sexism is part of that, but we also need to talk about racism, classism, colonialism, and so on. Okay. And so the way we kind of join these things, so intersectional feminism isn't just about women and it isn't just about gender, it's really about power. Thinking about like who collectively has power and who has collectively less power. And in today's world, as we see from that Economist quote, data is power. I mean, it's like power in a very literal financial sense of the word, and it's also power in a variety of other ways. And so our sort of just the main kind of premise of the book is that we can use intersectional feminism, and in fact that data science needs intersectional feminism if we hope to rectify some of these power imbalances. So we can use it to help challenge and change the balance of power. And so as I'm toggling between two things here. As we wrote the book, Lauren and I reviewed a lots of prior work, both in feminist academic worlds and also in feminist activism and feminist design, particularly as sort of feminist thinking has intersected with quantitative and applied fields. And we developed these 7 principles that you see here. And for us, these encapsulated the most important aspects of intersectional feminism as they relate to data science. It's not to say that there are things that we didn't miss, though. This is not like a comprehensive list, I would say. But the goal here was to think about not necessarily how do we make new feminist theory, but how do we take this like amazing intellectual heritage of feminist theory and use it as a guide for working with data science, to kind of like provide a model for people who are working with data or who want to work with data, or even for people who want to refuse to work with data, to push back against sort of data collection and analysis regimes. And so there's these 7 principles. It's a short talk. I'm only really going to talk about the first 2 principles, but then I definitely encourage you to look at the open access book, and you can read about the others that we talk about. So the first principle, and really like the first 2 chapters, so the first 2 principles have to do with power: examine power and challenge power. And this is really central to the feminist project because of how gender inequality is at root a question of power. One of the contributions of feminist organizers and activists and theorists is to give us models for how power operates in the world. And so for us, there's a variety of these models, but for us, we ground ours in the Black feminist sociologist, Patricia Hill Collins. And she describes power as what she calls a matrix of domination. And what she means by that is that power operates not only from the top down, like it's not just about whatever discriminatory laws imposed by a government, but across many layers of society. And she has 4 domains in which she talks about how power circulates to reinforce and reinscribe the status quo at all these different scales. And so one of those scales for data is even just in what data we even choose to collect. And so in the book, we tell the story of the artist Mimi Onwuka and her efforts to collect what she calls missing data sets. And so these are data sets that a reasonable person might think of should exist. So thinking about things like the number of citizens killed by police in the US context, or the number of women versus men with cases of the coronavirus. But these data sets actually don't exist. And so she, in this project, Mimi, undertakes this analysis of power. She examines this unequal power that in her project to ask why. So why do we have detailed data on things like guinea pig teeth or shopping carts that have been abandoned, but we don't have comprehensive data sets on things like police violence? And so again, like feminism involves this examination of power, but it also involves taking action. So that's why the second principle of data feminism is about challenging power. And we detail ways to push back using data collection, data science, data sets, to push back against unequal power structures. And so one example of doing this is this issue of feminicide in Mexico, which is another case of these missing data sets. So just to back up, feminicide is the gender-related killing of women and girls. It includes cis and trans women. Feminicide is legally defined as a crime in the majority of Latin American countries, but the state doesn't systematically collect data on feminicide. So it has these laws and it fails to actually implement the laws. It fails to even know to what extent it is not implementing the laws. So it's the subject of emerging anger in Latin America. So if you go look at the hashtag Ni Una Menos, it's you can see some of the like really vibrant public dialogue that's going on about this. So frustrated by the lack of action in this realm, the sort of individual person, Maria Salguero, single-handedly started compiling feminicides from media reports. And now she's been doing this for 5 years, and she's compiled the largest public archive of feminicide in Mexico. So she spends 2 to 4 days collecting data, and she has helped families locate loved ones. She's provided her data to journalists and NGOs, and she's actually testified in front of Mexico's Congress several times. So this is a form of feminist counter data. So an activist data collection that steps in when the state and other institutions have basically systematically failed to ensure some basic safety of like half their population. So it represents a way to use data to challenge power. I realize I just have a couple minutes left, so I want to just get to the last part here. So in 2019, I was on sabbatical and I was revising data feminism, and I was living in Buenos Aires, Argentina. Partially, I have family there, so that's what drew me there. And I started meeting with folks about who are working on the topic of feminicide in Argentina. And it turns out that Maria Salguero is by no means the only person conducting this counter data collection work. In fact, there's many activists, civil society organizations, journalists, especially in Latin America, but also in other places, who are collecting feminicide data. And about this time is when I started working with Silvana Fumega at the Iniciativa Latinoamericana por Datos Abiertos, and Elena Suarez of the group Feminicidio Uruguay. And so we've started a collaboration, and it's come together in this paper, which I'll just briefly sort of tell you the premise. So it's about feminicide and machine learning, detecting gender-based violence to strengthen civil sector activism. And so, like I said, we see feminicide data as this kind of example of counter data collection. So a way to collect counter data. And yet the folks who are doing this work, who we've started to interview, they face a lot of challenges in undertaking this counter data collection work. So those include information challenges, just like searching through Google Alerts and searches to log different cases in their databases. They include time and capacity and money challenges, and they include emotional challenges, things like dealing with data that is about people who have experienced the greatest form of harm possible, like they have left this world due to a form of preventable violence. And so it led us to ask this question of what are ways that AI and machine learning can help support and sustain efforts to collect feminicide data. And so where we've landed in conversations with folks is basically on the idea of a machine learning model that can help in the detection stage, basically like reduce the number of cases that activists have to look at and to sort of save them time and streamline their process. So don't really have time to go through it, but we've basically collected and labeled a training data set. We've created a feminicide detection model. And then we've integrated that we're like talking, we're doing this as a co-design, participatory design project. So we're talking with folks about how best to integrate this into their workflow. And so, yeah, so the way that I see it is this project is a kind of early test of how we can think about putting data feminism's principles into action, sort of trying to like use those as sort of values-based guiding points to put into action in a project like this. And we're also having a CSCW open call, and we would love to have folks be part of this CSCW virtual workshop about equitable participatory design. So I'm gonna leave it there, and apologies for whoever the terrible person was that intervened in our group.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Yeah, really sorry about the interruption. We're gonna keep going. So I'm gonna share Nassim's slides. Just 1 second. Okay. Can you see? Yes? Okay, great.
See?
Um,
Thank you so much.
and so you let me know when to advance the slides, right?
Yeah, and you will know based on the sort of it should be clear if I forget.
Okay.
But
Okay, yes. Go
thank
ahead.
you so much for the invitation, Neha, and thank you. It's wonderful to be part of this great group of speakers and scholars. Thank you, Catherine, for that great talk. It's great to go after you. I think you made sort of the conversation ready for what I will be talking about, which builds on that notion of feminism that you defined. This is based on and basically, I'm giving a brief synopsis of a recent journal article in Engaging Science, Technology, and Society that I wrote with my collaborator, and that's on the next slide, Anne Pollock. This is a collaborative work. We were both very sort of we had sort of individually identified this phrase unintended consequences, and we were both very unhappy about it. I created a folder called Unintended Consequences in 2015 as a shared Dropbox folder. And then all of a sudden, this past fall, we were both sort of ready to write it, and we wrote it in a few months. The start is a familiar everyday scene. This is the next slide. Two colleagues meet for the first time because of their shared interest. In this case, smart cities, but it could be any sort of technological intervention. One is a technology enthusiast, really excited about the potential and benefits of instrumenting cities with sensors. The other is a feminist intersectional scholar in tune with all the ways that technical interventions work to exacerbate existing inequalities. We are at a coffee shop overhearing their conversation, and she gets right into it. Next slide. And she says, so what is the interest, what is that interests you about smart cities? He explains enthusiastically all the efficiencies and benefits, and then quickly shares this example. Next slide. Imagine the ability to open up the path of emergency vehicles such as ambulances by turning all the traffic lights green, and how many lives we could save. And then the intersection section of Feminist Scholar responds, well, I see where you're coming from, but there's a lot to be concerned about too, like the kinds of mass surveillance it makes possible, or the susceptibility of such a centralized system to hacking or other breakdowns that would propagate across entire cities, in contrast to if we have a more contained, local distributed system. There's also the environmental impact, human labor impact of instrumenting cities with sensors. And she adds that, I actually, this is the next slide, slide 7, Neha. I actually worry about how we are investing in our cities, because I think about, what's the point of getting the patient to the hospital faster if they would still have to wait for a long time once they get there. So we need to think about, would it be more effective if we made sure healthcare was more accessible, both in terms of distance and availability, including insurance for preventive care, so that fewer people end up in the emergency rooms. So you can imagine if you're having this conversation with a colleague at this point, his face has lost all expression, as if to suggest that he has heard this story before. Yet he nods in agreement. She stops talking. He finally breaks the awkward silence, and in a tone that's both dismissive and defensive, he says, that's the next slide, sure, there are always unintended consequences. And with a barely noticeable shrug, he sits back in his chair, case closed. Next slide. Now, the conversation goes on for a little bit more in the paper, so I encourage you to read it. But the small snapshot is enough to show the uses and misuses of the term unintended consequences in science and technology discourses, and also captures the dismissive affective quality of its use, which serves to remind our feminist scholar that she's raising issues that bear on an already settled case. Like this is irrelevant. You are raising issues that are not important or meaningful. Now, next slide. There are several things to think about when we think about the uses of the term unintended consequences. First, it's its introduction by Robert Menton, which actually was not unintended consequences. The phrase is, the title of the paper is The Unanticipated Consequences of Purposive Social Action, which is actually, there's a subtle but important difference there. On the surface, the term unintended consequences captures a rather straightforward idea, right? The consequences of technologies or other interventions that were unforeseen at the time of their conception or design. The idea is nobody realized at the time that such and such would follow from what they were doing. But if we quickly survey the uses of the term in public and scholarly discourse, we say that there is a difference. It's not used in that sense. Instead, it's used for those consequences of technology that can indeed be anticipated in advance, but that fall outside of the purview of the specialization that conceive or implement products. As such, the concept is emptied of its substance, while at the same time doing substantial political work, especially for tech companies and technology developers, as well as their enthusiasts. It provides a category that is descriptive of social, environmental, and political impacts of science and technology as ones that lack prior deliberate action. Phenomena are described as unintended consequences that are deemed too difficult, too out of scope, too out of reach, or too messy to have been dealt with at any point in time before the problems were created. And so those problems are created and they are sort of meant for somebody else to deal with. Three key points about the use of, like, the key things that the phrase unintended consequences does, and we are on next slide on 11. One is that it's exculpatory. Concerns are acknowledged by the enthusiasts, described under a non-threatening descriptor, and then set aside for others, be it ethics boards or policymakers, to deal with. So the conflation of intention and anticipation elides the distinction between them and allows enthusiasts to abdicate responsibility for the perfectly foreseeable consequences of particular decisions by positioning those consequences outside of their purview. Here we introduce a complementary concept to Donna Haraway's God trick. If the God trick is about sort of the idea that science can know it all, and it's sort of this idea of a view from nowhere, the angel trick is this notion of somebody that has sort of a lot of power, but within a very a specific domain. Even if angels might be aware of other domains, to the extent that their knowledge bears on the action they take, it's highly circumscribed, and so are their powers. So they kind of say that they know it, yes, but they can't act on it. In this way, it's also disciplinary. Notice the disciplinary power of the phrase unintended consequences that undermines and dismisses the epistemological value of what is being raised by the feminist scholar, while at the same time saying, claiming ownership of it, saying that, oh, I already know it. So your knowledge is not valuable, it's already known, but it's also irrelevant. The issue that the feminist is raising are rendered uninteresting and out of place, that's actively turned away. And finally, it is ideological. So technological pursuits are legitimized no matter how dangerous they are, leaving it to ethicists and policymakers or others to fine-tune their features in extreme cases, or adjust the conditions of their use and somehow otherwise address their fallout. In doing so, the concept of unintended consequences promotes the reductive view of ethics as regulatory, and it sticks to the idea that tech is neutral or inherently good. So it is actually a term that is ideological or perpetuates this ideology of technology being inherently good. I'm on slide 14, Neha. Thank you so much. So unintended consequences operates in a subtle but insidious way to uphold the status quo, especially institutional structures and knowledge regimes that have produced those negative impacts, inclusive of the entrenched privileging of expertise in narrowly technical domains while avoiding accountability. So the term unintended consequences becomes a barrier to rather than a facilitator of vital discussions about designs. In the encounter that we saw earlier, the rhetorical move of deflecting blame by invoking unintended consequences ends the conversation. This provides an opportunity to understand the counterproductivity of invocations of unintended consequences in discussions of science and technology design more broadly. Actually, we see that in the publications of sort of technical publications as well. There's a big portion of the article that's focused on the technical intervention, and then a short section on the end that says, oh, there's all of this other stuff that like privacy and environment and whatever have you, but that is something that we are not dealing with here. Whereas those issues could be integrated and should be part of the design discussion from the get-go. The overemphasis on intent, understood predominantly in its individualistic interpretation, forecloses considerations of the complexity of social systems in such a way as to lead us to, quick technical fixes. I'm on the last slide, Neha. Questions of innocence and blame are really not at stake here. And this is something else that I see as a critic a lot of times, that criticism is seen as blame, whereas criticism is there to help us think about the systemic issues that technology design brings about. But sort of by sort of like the phrase unintended consequence, by focusing on the sort of idea of intent, it works to deny accountability, imagination, or commitment. We can actually think about how this conversation could go a different way if, these two scholars potentially have a lot of resources, they are very intelligent, they know the city. So instead of, just foreclosing the conversation by saying, oh, it's unintended consequences, they could come together and try to figure this out. And that's my hope, by foregrounding how unintended consequences is used to help, carry forward those conversations. You might ask what other kinds of connections, interventions, or experiments may be possible. And sort of how these conversations or criticisms or other modes of engaging with technical interventions could be a beginning for fostering imaginative and collaborative engagements that are imbued with possibility. And that's where I am.
Thank you so much, Nassim. I'm going to stop screen sharing now, and I think that's really exactly the type of conversations that maybe many of us need to be engaging with, right? So really thank you for that inspiration. Let's move on now. Shaowen, do you want to go ahead and try to share your screen?
Yes, I can try to do that.
Yeah.
Hopefully it will be okay. there.
And I think, I'm sorry if we blocked a couple of folks. I know that Elena was blocked by mistake and she's been trying to get back in and she hasn't been able to. So I did ask a couple of the co-hosts to see if there's a way to unblock participants. And I'm not sure if you know if that's possible. If anyone else has experience with this, if you could just message and we'll
Neha,
try to get her back into the session.
Neha, could you make me host for a
Catherine?
minute, and I'll try to work on it, and then I'll give you the hosts back. Would that be possible?
Okay. Yeah, I need to figure out how to do that, but I'll do that in just 1 second. And Shaowen, you can go ahead and get started.
You see my screen properly?
Yes, we see your screen. Yes, fully.
Okay, great. Thank you, Neha, for the invitation. Your commitment to broaden participation and the tenacity to see it through continues to be a source of inspiration for me. It's a big honor to be here today alongside my amazing co-panelists. It looks like, okay, there. I am professor in the College of Information Sciences and Technology at Penn State University. My overall research program is designing for social change, leveraging feminism, design, and social science methodology. Originally trained in comparative literature, I approach human-computer interaction in ways that reflect my humanist background, situating my work in the intersection of ACI, gender studies, science and technology studies, and internet and media studies. 10 years ago, I proposed feminist ACI as a research agenda for ACI. To me, feminist ACI is the reflective integration of feminist strategies as a resource for interaction design. Since then, I've been trying to further develop and advance this agenda. I've devoted much of my career over the past decade to developing theory and methods to support designing for social change. Designing for social changes faces a number of challenges. Many prevailing methods are commercially focused and or technocentric or scientific. Feminist and critical approaches and concerns are often treated with suspicion. And the sheer scale of social issues can make efforts at intervention daunting, even utopian. But is utopianism a bad thing? In recent years, I've taken up a new interest in it. Utopianism is appealing to me because it reminds us that the future could be radically better, not just a little better. One recent definition of utopia is that it constitutes a vision of a wholesale restructuring of our social and political universe according to some rationally worked out plan. But as we all know, utopia has a bad reputation. Utopias in describing perfect end states divorced from our everyday present seem to offer no concrete social strategies or tactics to get from here to there. So in my work, I've turned to a theoretical perspective I find both practical and inspiring: feminist utopianism. I believe that feminist reworking of traditional utopianism not only addresses the problem of no way to get from here to there, but feminist utopianism can also integrate well with design methods. So how does this work? In my prior work, I have adapted feminist utopianism in the context of ACI design. Specifically, I conceptualize feminist utopian design's double move. Methodologically, the first move is diagnostic critique. This is analytical and involves an explication of how social assemblages in the present reflect hegemonic and otherwise non-utopian values. In the context of design, diagnostic critique might appear in the form of design criticism, as well as in the critique of design agendas. The second move is anticipatory design. In it, we prototype glimpses of radically improved futures and use those images to woo others to join in and help bring them into being. For design, it can literally be a prototype, design fiction, a more democratized design process, or design agenda. Today, I want to talk about a design that does critical work. The design is the Formosa cup, a menstrual cup from Taiwan. And my role as a feminist critical scholar is to help my audience appreciate the cup as a design that does important and efficacious critical work. I begin with an idea common in feminist thought, which is that our tendency to suppress or neglect the body in our thinking makes it easier to think and act in ways that harm people. The harm is right there in front of us, but we don't even see it. The feminist call for attending to bodies is not the same as ACI and design's calls to take embodiment more seriously, though that is important too. Rather, it is a way of understanding socio-technical infrastructures, starting with the dispositions of human bodies within them, rather than such systems' technical features and capabilities. That is, it includes a focus on what our bodies are doing and not doing, the forms of physical suffering that socio-technical systems contribute to, and the denials of pleasure likewise inscribed into them. In doing so, it also encourages us to notice the ways that future technologies will participate in social conflicts by differentially positioning male, female, trans, Black and white, old and young, citizen or immigrant, and poor or wealthy bodies. The Formosa cup is a functional and commercial product, but it also mounts a frontal attack on ways that female bodies are positioned and cared for in the world. So let me introduce the Formosa cup to you, including the description of it as a product and also the basics of how it was invented and commercialized. So heralded as the first cup for Taiwanese women, the Formosa cup is made with medical grade soft silicone. Unlike pads and tampons that had to be discarded after each use, the cup can last 5 to 10 years and can be reused. In 2015, just 5 years ago, Vanessa Zhen came up with the idea for the Formosa cup and began to seek investor funding. She went to Taiwan's Kickstarter-like crowdfunding platform, and the response was overwhelming. She raised funds from more than 6,000 supporters to manufacture more than 10,000 cups. This is more than 300% of her original target. There's very little unique about the Formosa cup at this level. Menstrual cups have been available in the West for decades under different brand names. The Formosa cup is not significant as a menstrual cup, but for other reasons. To understand those reasons, I will need to work backwards and forwards. I begin with the hymen, which turns out to be very important to the Formosa cup story because of the significance of breaking the hymen, which both menstrual cups and tampons alike are prone to do. A hymen is a thin membrane of tissue that partially closes the opening of the vagina, whose presence is traditionally taken to be a mark of virginity. A major obstacle to any kind of menstrual cup in Taiwan are social taboos around crossing the boundary into the vagina, a taboo that often focalizes on the care and maintenance of the hymen. Products such as tampons, menstruation cups, and vibrators are considered by many Taiwanese to be yiwu. It's a foreign body with derogatory connotations. Even as recent as the 1990s, only 2.1% of Taiwanese women use tampons. Most Taiwanese women have never had anything in their vaginas aside from their husband's penises, nor have they been taught that it is okay to do so. An entire hymen is considered to be a woman's greatest gift to her husband. This cultural mores is reflected in contemporary law. Prior to 2009, tampon packages were required to carry these warnings, as you see on the screen. Vanessa shared with us a conversation she had with a mother about the menstrual cup. Why are you promoting products like this? Why do you ask my daughter to put something like Formosa cup in her body? And some husbands are also against it. Vanessa told us, I saw a couple walking by the Formosa cup booth a couple of times. The wife showed a lot of interest and wanted to learn more, but the husband told her, don't use something like this, and drag her away. There's no doubt that the hymen, the virginity fetish, menstrual health, and other women's issues are already undergoing change in Taiwan. Even so, the Formosa cup has driven quite a bit of this change in ways that are far-reaching and surprising. I'll begin with the Formosa cup's most visible achievement. During its design and development, Vanessa had to confront the fact that menstrual cups were literally illegal in Taiwan. Fortunately, Taiwan has mechanism for direct citizen engagement with policymaking. Vanessa then enlisted the help of Taiwanese women's rights activist Shaowen to petition for a new law to legalize the sale of menstrual cups using join.gov.tw in 2016. Join.gov.tw is an online open government platform in Taiwan that facilitates direct public engagement with different branches and offices in the central government in Taiwan. The platform offers systems and procedures by which citizens can participate in policymaking, demand transparency and accountability from government, and collaboratively leverage open data. Vanessa's petition was seconded by more than 6,000 people, prompting the relevant government branches to respond. In spring of 2017, 3 years ago, Taiwan's Food and Drug Administration amended the law, and the Taiwanese women can now purchase menstrual cups legally. In my writing, I also touch on the Formosa cup's socio-cultural position within Taiwan and its proposal for alternative subjectivities of menstruation. But in the interest of time, I will move on to conclusion. I would like to offer some thoughts on critical scholarship as a form of design research to conclude the talk. Specifically, I like to address three interrelated questions. In what sense is the Formosa cup a design that does critical work? How does this reading of Formosa cup speak to the feminist utopian project of futuring? And in what sense is the present work critical design research? I'll begin with the first, which is how Formosa cup is a design that does critical work. Clearly, it has nothing to do with Dawn and Raby's practice in its conception, outcomes, presentations, and effects. Yeah, I believe that this is critical because it is a design that reframes care of the vagina away from care of the hymen towards a care of menstruation, managing its pain and inconvenience, but also becoming comfortable with menstruation as part of one's own body, body experience, and body care. This reframing depended on and drove meaningful social change, which included changes to relevant laws, educational campaigns, scientific data collection, and the consumer marketplace for feminine hygiene. But you might ask, wouldn't all this have happened anyway? Perhaps, but in Taiwan in 2016 and 2017, it didn't happen some other way. These changes could have been led by feminist politicians, activists, and educators, but it was not. In Taiwan in 2016, it was driven by a design, the Formosa cup. I think it's important to know here as well that the Formosa cup went quite a bit further than design for debate. Sure, there was a debate, but that was just the tip of the iceberg. This debate wasn't held in a graduate seminar or among well-heeled white liberals in an art museum. It happened in a democratic policy environment and led to actual social and legal change. My second question has to do with how this reading of Formosa cup speaks to the feminist utopian project of futuring. I want to return to feminist argument I summarized earlier in the talk, that attending to the actual dispositions of bodies serves as an epistemological purpose to help us to see how our social systems cause injustice and suffering. In the case of the Formosa cup, the actual dispositions are bleeding female bodies that can only use pads, but not tampons, nor cups, to preserve traditional and misogynistic notions of femininity, moral uprightness, and marital eligibility. Again, as an ergonomic and functional product, Formosa cup is neither important nor especially interesting. As an efficacious political intervention within a specific sociocultural location in place and history, that is, as an ideological, aesthetic, and ethical product, I think the Formosa cup is much more significant. But the visibility of its achievements depends on attending to body practices, and body suffering. My final question is how all these amounts to critical research about design. The Formosa cup was far more than the creation of a functional industrial product. It was a sociological and political intervention that prompted the conversations and led to actual legislative change. More poetically, I suggest that just as the physical Formosa cup has the potential to destroy a woman's hymen, so does the Formosa cup as an ideology destroy the ideology of the hymen fetish, and the latter was required before the former was ever possible. Thank you all for listening, and I'm happy to share more about this work.
Thank you so much, Shaowen. You know, as always, kind of a very thought-provoking discussion. And with that, I want to actually now introduce our last couple of speakers, our last talk, Pragya, Saboo, and Navya, Nanda. And they're 2 of 4 co-founders of Aara Health. I just want to say a little bit about kind of their background. So they this is a startup in its early stages, and I think that there's a lot that's exciting about it. And you know, for many of us who care about combining, bringing together research and practice, I think there's a lot of potential here to you know, shape conversations in a space that it really needs it right now. And you know, following on from Shaowen's presentation. So Pragya was a Georgia Tech grad, and that's actually how I came to know of this work. And she's currently product manager at Oscar Health by day, and this is what she does by night. And Navya recently graduated with her undergrad degree from Fordham University, and they've been working on this project. And lots of exciting findings that hopefully they will share in a few. So thank you so much for joining us. Are you able to unmute, both of you?
Yes, I was able to. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the warm introduction, Professor, and thank you so much for having us at this incredibly insightful discussion. Really excited to talk to everyone here alongside this panel of extremely established women. I feel like I've already learned so much from all the insightful talks today, and I'm actually really looking forward to reading up more on this and integrating all these learnings and research into our actual work. But today we want to talk a little bit more about what our team has been working over the last few months. Can you see the screen still?
No.
Oh, 1 second, sorry. Okay. Awesome.
Yes, now we can see it.
All right, great.
Hi everyone, I'm Navya, another co-founder at Aara Health. Like Professor mentioned, I recently just graduated from Fordham University with a major in digital technology and emerging media with a concentration in UX design. I'm really interested in looking at how technology can be used to alleviate the inaccessibility to healthcare faced by many women in India today. Pragya, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, I muted myself as a habit, and I realized that I could, because of just keeping everything professional, I wasn't able to unmute myself. But thank you, Navya. And I'm Pragya. I'm a product manager and entrepreneur and a graduate from Georgia Tech with a degree in industrial and systems engineering. I graduated in 2017. As my day job, I'm working on solving healthcare issues in the US as a part of Oscar Health's virtual care team. And as my night job, I'm working on solving healthcare issues for women in India as a part of the co-founding team at Aara Health. As many of you are in no doubt aware that women are the most vulnerable to inadequacies in the Indian healthcare system. We started Aara Health as we discovered that the current Indian healthcare landscape for women remains largely inaccessible and stigmatized with significant distrust and unawareness. 1 in 5 women in India have feminine health issues such as UTIs, PCOS, endometriosis, which largely gets aggravated to a more serious chronic condition due to the absence of prioritization of women in the healthcare system. Sorry, we're having some glitch with the slides.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah, why don't you just keep it like this, Navya, and then we can just go through. This should be good. So we're working on Aara Health with a team of incredibly passionate and dedicated women. Alongside Navya and me, we have Ahilya and Malika on the team as well. We came together as a part of a virtual hackathon earlier this year in March and quickly realized that we were passionate about the same things and that women's healthcare needs in India need to be seriously addressed. So what is Aara Health striving to do? Aara Health wishes to address the inadequacies in the healthcare system by creating a safe and accessible healthcare platform for women by women. We're currently in the initial stages of this journey, and our goal is to support women by providing a digital platform where they can access content and engage in safe and stimulating discussions around difficult to talk about issues. In the future phases, which is what we are prepping for today, we hope to build a virtual platform that allows women to access high quality products and doctors, making their access to experience with healthcare smooth and comfortable. So as of today, since 4 months we've launched, we've built partnerships with medical experts to create medically verified content. And within just a few months, we've gotten over 15,000 followers on Instagram, out of which a large percentage of women engage with our content on a daily basis through messages or comments, saves, and shares. We've also built a community for women on Facebook where women have been opening up about their personal healthcare experiences and showing support to other women going through similar struggles. The target audience for Aara Health is women who need a more safe and secure outlet for help, as many face privacy issues with their existing doctors. Most women in India face these privacy issues because of their variety of social, cultural, and accessibility factors. For instance, many who live in joint families, which is a very common culture practice in India, are unable to visit or speak to their doctors alone, struggle with opening up about certain intimate health issues due to the lack of confidentiality. Women also feel that their doctors may not keep their information to themselves or may judge them for their health conditions and experiences. Even though this behavioral pattern is prevalent across all of India, from tier 1 to tier 2 cities and rural villages, we're currently focusing our efforts in the tier 1 city market. This market has the highest mobile penetration and disposable income for women, and more women in this market are educated when compared to other markets, thus making it a great starting point. Breast cancer alone accounts for 25% of all cancer-related deaths in India, killing an Indian woman every 8 minutes. There is a need for disruption in this female-focused healthcare industry because of the lack of attention will negatively affect our economy and our beloved country. Consider cervical cancer. For instance, it is one of the most curable forms of cancer, if and only identified early. But 2/3 of all Indian women diagnosed with cervical cancer die because they're not properly informed about this condition, techniques, and vaccines for prevention, or ways in which they can treat this condition.
So we wanted to look into this a bit more, and for our user research, we surveyed 300 plus women in and around India aged between 18 and 55 living in tier 1 cities. So these are women that have been educated and do have access to smartphones. The response was overwhelming and extremely shocking as we learned that 63% of these women felt uninformed of the preventative and routine tests for their age group. More than 50% lacked an appropriate understanding of how to handle their emotional and mental well-being, and about 40% felt they lacked the appropriate knowledge about basic feminine care, such as vaginal health, sexual hygiene, and appropriate menstrual health management. This in itself is an alarming, as women should be encouraged based on their age to conduct annual tests and examinations to rule out chronic conditions. Pap smears and mammograms are tests that should be done yearly or bi-yearly by women. Our survey showed that women lacked basic awareness around monthly self-breast examination, something that should be conducted by women all the time. This lack in awareness and services led us to understand that the Indian market has no women-centric health companies, reinforcing or advocating for these behavioral changes. We need more focused and directed care for women because feminine health itself is a big umbrella under which all specialties and conditions require appropriate diagnosis and care. Existing telemedicine or health tech companies in India lack this focused approach. Pragya, one of India's largest telemedicine platforms, has poor provider protection, which allows users to misuse the platform's tools and compromise the health professionals. Librate, another health tech company, has a complex UI that lacks efficiency or an intuitive, happy flow for its users. CultFit, a more fitness-based platform, has a one-size-fits-all approach that overwhelms the user and lacks any focus towards women's health as it caters to both genders and does not dive deep into the different specialties and conditions under feminine health. Tata Health, a large app in India, includes a section for women's health that is currently left blank, suggesting neglect or a lack of care towards less important feminine health issues. This led us to speak to our community of women to understand a bit more about the reasons behind this inaccessibility. Through our community, we learned that women in tier 1 and tier 2 cities in India do not feel comfortable buying feminine hygiene and sexual wellness products from chemists and drugstores. These stores are largely occupied by male shopkeepers and assistants, and there is a constant feeling of being judged or watched by them. More and more women each day are opening up about their sufferings from conditions such as PCOS and depression, but there is a long way to go. There is still a lack of knowledge and awareness around topics such as PCOS, which affects 1 in 5 Indian women. With our existing lifestyle, the prevalence of PCOS in urban Indian women is continuously increasing. Other conditions women would like more information about are menopause, menstruation, bone health, and nutrition, very basic health conditions that should be talked about more often in our context. Women are skeptical to receive therapy because of the fear of being judged or because of sensitive information reaching the wrong people. There is a severe lack of trust with providers, a fear of family members knowing about their therapy sessions, and also a fear of transport to and from therapy clinics, as they do not want to be noticed at these locations. Based on all the research that we have conducted, looking forward, we want to take a more research-based design approach. By using an iterative approach to work with co-design, we want to provide relevant content on our digital touchpoints to help continuously spread awareness around the earlier mentioned issues. Researching the market and studying the landscape deeply by understanding the user behavior in terms of cultural backgrounds, social behaviors, and conditions will allow us to design the best solutions for women that cater and suit their daily lifestyle. Closing the feedback loop by researching and testing our target audience and benchmarking against our success metrics will give us a better understanding of how well these developments are aiding women. We want to continue conducting user research with all of our stakeholders, including doctors, potential users, and their social networks, to identify the most viable go-to-market product, whether that's an e-commerce platform, teleconsultations, content, or simply just community. We also want to learn from our testing environments, from our Facebook community that has over 400 plus women, our website and patient inbound requests, Instagram content as well. We want to build a superior product that addresses the market need. We are looking to release our MVP and go to market by December 2020. To conclude, it is evident that India requires a more focused approach towards women's healthcare. The biology of a woman's body is complex and requires attention in areas different to those of men, which is where the lack in focus comes in regarding the Indian healthcare system. The current system is built around and caters to the medical needs of primarily men. Aara Health aims to change this approach by emphasizing the importance of building a healthcare system that keeps women at the core, catering to the biological, emotional, and cultural needs of women that will allow for a more focused diagnosis and treatment. So we actually wanted to pose a question to the audience. According to you, what is the one idea or issue that we should be focusing on to improve healthcare for women in Tier 1 cities in India? And we have a quick survey to help collect these answers, which we'll send on the chat below.
Thanks for sharing that. Thank you, Pragya. Thank you, Navya. That was really inspiring, and all the very best to you on this venture. There's some comments also for you in the chat. Okay, so thank you, everybody. Firstly, round of applause. I think you're all muted, but I clap anyway for the rest of you all. We've been trying to manage the participant list to make sure that it's only the speakers who are unmuted. But this is actually a good time to also share your questions. We have about 23 minutes to get to questions, and I know that there's a bunch that were mentioned earlier for Catherine, and so maybe we could start with some of those, and then we can go across the talks. How about that? So I'm trying to now find those messages. Or if anyone else can, please go ahead. There was certainly a question for Catherine from Aparna about November gathering. So yes, if you can share information, we can also share that on our mailing list. And then there's a workshop that they're doing at CSCW 2020. Curtis had a question. Curtis, would you like to ask your question?
Sure. Yeah. I'm gonna go make sure I know. Yeah, so, I mean, Catherine, thank you again for the talk. At the end of it, there was a discussion on sort of generating new data pipelines for data to be collected to fill in these gaps that you identified. And I was curious what of the existing tooling it fits that ecosystem versus doesn't. When you talk to these kind of companies, there's a large rhetoric around the democratization of these tools so that anyone can generate their data and can do their own analysis. But they're actually, of course, oriented towards paying customers and things like this. So I'm curious about what of that tooling is good, if all of it is good, or if there are holes that need to be filled in that space.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. I mean, I think for us in this project, we're taking a very, I would say like activist-centered approach. So sort of like what we're doing based on the needs of this like specific and sort of small group of activists that we're working with. There's conceivably another way of proceeding, which would be to aggregate the data ourselves into some central repository and be like, hey, we have the biggest data on feminicide in the entire world. You know what I mean? Or like work with like an industry partner or something like that. And like the reason we would not choose to do that right now is there's a whole huge variety of different archiving practices and categorization practices around feminicide, and they vary according to the person's context and what issues are more salient and reasons for people to be killed. And like every activist has their own taxonomy, and in a lot of ways that's like geographically and culturally specific. And so like that's where I think, especially when you're thinking about this kind of like extremely sensitive and in many ways very personal data, because these folks are collecting names, causes of death, stories about death. Often the activists are logging social media things as well. And all of them talk about like the care, like, you know, one of the things we're going to be writing about is how the care with which they treat these archives, and that the fact that collecting the data is not just about data, but it's also about a kind of process of memorialization of these people's lives. And so like, it's where, and that for me is the place where it like really doesn't meet, like I in general, like I'm a kind of a fan of open data, and I'm totally a fan of democratizing data. Like I do other work on data literacy, and yet like there are places and kinds of data and practices where it like those two worlds I think like don't really intersect, because that like kind of anonymous, like here's the data for everybody approach like really doesn't work in this kind of more sensitive and culturally grounded context. So like I kind of see a clash of values in those things right now, I guess, is what I would say.
So there were a couple of questions for Nassim, and I know that you addressed them briefly on the chat, but would you like to say a little bit more? So I guess there was a question from Joy, and then a question from Curtis.
Yes, let me remember.
So Curtis brought up the idea of premature optimization.
Yeah, and I haven't heard from that, although it seems like a similarly insidious I wish I knew more about it. But actually, I think what that brings up in my mind is that when we think about artifacts and politics and how artifacts work for the sort of smooth operations of power and perpetuating existing power relations, we think about, you know, bridges and social media. Like Langdon Winner Bridges is a great example of, you know, a tool that was designed to oppress people. Or we can similarly think about hostile architecture. But actually, I think part of the work of design is to think about discourse and think about these terms that we use, these ways that we approach and frame problems that can actually be equally powerful and harmful, but we tend to ignore them as part of the vocabulary of our disciplines. Again, not knowing what that exact phrase is, but I can see that there are many of those, and many papers can be written about the various ways that these terms are used in sort of and sort of mediate these disciplinary relations.
Okay, let's see. Is there a question for Shaowen that I missed? So a comment from Catherine. Do you want to speak, Catherine? You can share your thoughts.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Shaowen. I love the presentation. Actually, maybe my question for you is just what are your thoughts on femtech? Like as this kind of emerging, like a word that captures this like industry that is emerging around sort of women's health products and investment and stuff like that. Cause like the cup seemed like it sort of fits into that category of things. And yet I really appreciated how you framed it as also like a critical and this poetic intervention in the Taiwanese context. And that for me felt like different than a lot of the femtech stuff that I'm familiar with, like more in the US context.
Yeah, thank you for raising that. I think it's hard to have a kind of like a blanket statement about just femtech in general. But one thing and this is why feminist utopianism is appealing to me, is that it's really, the focus really is on kind of small opening glimpses, glimmers of hope. And, you know, I think that if you just want to look at the Formosa Cup as kind of universal kind of utopian product, I think it will fail, because there are aspects of it is very kind of neoliberal. There's a lot, I mean, still at the end of the day wants to make money. But one thing I love about this is at the same time that it's commercial, it's also trying to advance women's rights and educate women about their bodies in parallel. And I think that's this kind of glimmers or small openings of hope that I think we should try to focus on. So just try not. I think at least for myself, I try not to be too critical about some of the things I've seen, but try to find the good in it.
I want to pose a question that actually combines or addresses both what Shaowen brought up and then the presentation by Pragya and Navya, and also in response to Akhil's question around challenges with extending the work to tier 2 and 3 cities in India. And let me just kind of add on to this question, and I'd love to know what Pragya and Navya think, and then also what Shaowen thinks. So this is a question that we see often when we do research around women's health issues or health and well-being more generally, that, well, this is what you're looking at, it applies to women who are in very privileged settings or who are living in tier 1 cities and not the most kind of disadvantaged populations. And I guess we look at disadvantage along different dimensions, right? And this is probably a question that you've thought about with Aara Health. And then, the follow-up question for Shaowen is really kind of how do we look at these different dimensions of disadvantage and marginalization or inequities to kind of address such a critique. So, okay, so first part of the question is really what Akhil asked, which is how do you see this kind of extending to tier 2 and 3 cities?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think it's a very, very relevant question. Firstly, definitely like our goal as a project eventually is to, impact tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 cities, even rural settings. But we have to start somewhere. So we're starting with getting, I guess, the easier win or like the low hanging fruit, which is nowhere really easy, but we're starting with tier 1 cities. But from our initial research that we've done, we've conducted, a few in-person interviews. We have a community of people who are not just from tier 1 cities, but also from tier 2, tier 3 cities. We've done some research and reading and stuff as well. And we've learned that, although mobile penetration and data consumption is really on the rise, so the accessibility of like digital content and that consumption is really on the rise in tier 2, tier 3 markets. The education and awareness around healthcare issues is still a big miss. And that is an extension from the knowledge that is shared within tier 1 market, and that's extending to tier 2 and tier 3 as well. There are more societal and social barriers as well. The more people who are dependent on family incomes to actually think of things independently, think of their own health independently. And then finally, generally what we've learned, which is a sad truth, that women in India tend to prioritize everyone else's health first in the family and then their own. And that something is again very much reflected in tier 2 and tier 3 cities in those markets. So I think that those are some of the social and psychological as well as the societal constructs that we may have to like break into by a lot of education, a lot of awareness, reaching through like a lot of content. And that is our focus right now. Our focus is to create a user base which is going to get educated through the educational content we're putting out there. And that's impacting women across all tiers of India. Navya, if you want to add something, I don't know if I missed something, or anyone else.
Yeah, so there's a question, actually perfectly timed, Amy. So do you want to just say it out loud? I don't know if it's possible to unmute.
Oh, sorry. I don't know if that was addressed to me or not. Yes. But yeah, I think it's super exciting to see you get this started off the ground. Might all like to. But perhaps extending on Neha's question, even within tier 1 cities, there's still a very different forth. Have you thought about how you might extend within tier 1 cities as opposed to thinking of it just as tier 1 city to
we can't really hear you, but I think we got the question, the gist of the question. Like you rightfully mentioned, there are different levels of privilege in a tier 1 city itself. Most of us are based in Mumbai, which is a metropolitan tier 1 city. So that is where we plan to start our first phase of go-to-market, which is an area that we are familiar with a community of women who we feel have benefited from the educational content that we have put out there. But we do also understand that there is, you know, a larger segment of women in Mumbai itself who may have, like Pragya mentioned, social cultural barriers to actually getting access to that healthcare. For example, a lot of women in India, like she mentioned, live in joint families, which means that a lot of women actually share phones with their spouses or other family members, which limits their access to the content that they can see, because sometimes they may not want other members of their family looking at the content that they're looking for, especially if it is sensitive information around sexual health and menstruation. Another barrier also that we could face is, you know, the concept of anonymity, where a lot of women do feel uncomfortable kind of openly talking about their issues on a community. So how we plan to combat that is, when we do kind of go to market with our product, we want to definitely build in anonymous features that would allow these women to ask questions and still partake in discussions regardless of you know, where they are based or the amount of information that they have, which would allow us to still give them that anonymity, but have access to the community to kind of talk more about and learn more about these issues.
And to add to that, there's also a lot of stigma, like we shared in our presentation. People just feel uncomfortable even going to a store and buying, you know, feminine hygiene products and sexual hygiene products or sexual health products. And that interaction itself is not just in tier 1 cities, it's also in tier 2, tier 3, and it definitely varies a lot more based on the privilege you have. If you're in India, maybe you have some help at home if you're privileged enough to help you procure these things, but most people don't, and they need to do these trips to the chemist shop themselves and buy these things, and there's a big gap, and there's they don't feel comfortable doing it. So there's again this whole space which we can look into where we can alleviate some of the stresses and concerns of just you know, through e-commerce that can help women get these products in a more sophisticated, discreet way without having them to bear the burden of like awkward conversations or sharing some things with their family or people around them that they may not want to really like talk about.
Cool. Thank you. There's another message for you to look at. Project Epoch, carried out by Jackie O'Neill at Microsoft Research. Any other questions that anyone would like to share? And you can just speak up. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my question then for Shaowen. So we were talking about just different types of inequities, right, and different types of privilege. And when we think about the ICTD space, this is something that comes up often, where we immediately kind of focus on the socioeconomic status. And we say that, you know, it's all about kind of poverty versus riches, and in very sort of economic or financial terms. But you know, if you think about other dimensions of inequity, those can be equally, if not more powerful in kind of shaping access to some of this, let's say, information or technology or education, what have you. Do you have any thoughts on kind of how to think about or how to frame these other inequities when we're talking about things like women's health? Okay,
very, very big questions, very difficult. Obviously, I'm sure what I'm gonna say probably is not gonna, you know, amount to anything, but at least this is at least my starting thought. So I think recently, because a lot of different things going on, I've been taking a very special interest and also been reflecting a lot on this notion of conflict, and also those who are marginalized in and also by it. So I want to go back to feminist utopianism, and it's kind of, the notion of the perfect, society that the feminist utopianists are critiquing, is that rather than envisioning a society without any conflict, which might entail the denying the existence of the marginalized, I think what I would like to see is use the voice of the marginal as a starting point for intervention, and then so that basically the conflict is seen as driving the progress. And obviously that entails that, we want to work towards a situation where we have the marginalized can structurally be given a voice all the time. And so I think, a lot of these kind of different complex factors are difficult, and especially when we do any social justice oriented work, women's health included, it's just going to be very challenging to try to balance a lot of these different things together. And this is why I'm trying to find ways to see conflicts or problems or issues as a way to kind of get us going, as opposed to be something that we had to fight. Or yes, I think in the case of the Formosa Cup in Taiwan, the case I talked about, the challenge is that those menstrual cups, women's health hygiene products were illegal, right? And so, you can totally say, what, this is so difficult, maybe I should try to come up with a different product. But I think, the product designer or the entrepreneur then work with feminist activists, and then also within the context of the open data, open government environment that Taiwan has, that kind of makes things, work in progress accomplishments. And so I would like to look at this as more kind of process oriented, as opposed to trying to get there, or if we don't get there right away, that somehow the project is a failure or something. Sorry, a lot of rambling.
No, I don't think it was a simple question, and I'm not sure if I even, quite broad. But any other questions? I mean, you can write them on chat or you can share them out loud. I really like what you said actually about conflict, Shaowen, and I'm thinking if Catherine or Nassim have thoughts on that as well, like looking at just, because I guess even the unintended consequences paper is sort of is talking about a particular kind of conflict that arises often in many of our lives. And so in terms of grappling with that, do you have thoughts that are possible to share in a few minutes on how to go about it?
Sure, I will just echo what Shaowen just said, that instead of avoiding the conflict, we could see it as a productive source of imagination. Like, what does this conflict tell me? How can I build on it? How can I move forward from it, as opposed to actively trying to avoid it or make it meaningless? Think about your interlocutor, whomever they may be, as unintelligent or problematic, and sort of that's where we also in the paper talk about the idea of feminist killjoy from Sarah Ahmed's work. It's also important to be willing to create conflict. we maybe please talk about these other issues? And that's, you know, the figure of a feminist killjoy. That's actually a very uncomfortable and uneasy place to be, but it's necessary if we are to make any progress. Catherine, I wonder if...
Yeah. I agree.
Catherine,
and I love the figure of the killjoy. It's like, it's such a like beautiful metaphor and like encapsulates all these things that it's like I've felt before. Yeah, and I would just say like, yeah, maybe in a way, at least for data feminism and thinking about these ideas of counter data, is like, that is conflict, because like, and it's like implied, I think even in the definition of feminism, is that feminism is action, because the world is not yet utopia, you know, like it's not yet the place that we want to live and the place where we thrive and flourish. And so like we have to take action, and that action it entails conflict. It involves killing people's joy that they, you know, the world is all great and everything. And then I always come back to, you know, I've been thinking a lot recently about this quote from Frederick Douglass, and he says, power concedes nothing without demand. You know, and so it's like the people in power, they're not just going to be like, oh, okay, like here's your power back, you know. So that to me involves conflict. Yeah.
Thank you for those thoughts to end the call with. I just want to quickly ask Shaowen and also Pragya and Navya, any other closing thoughts that you'd like to share before we end?
Not so much, but I just want to thank everybody. Thank your amazing, you know, kind of commitment to kind of bring us all together, and for all of your, so many people. I was very surprised in a very good way. It's so wonderful to be in the company of fellow travelers who care deeply about these issues. And so definitely keep these talks and gathering coming. I think we all can benefit from it. Thank you.
And we'll slowly learn how to manage the participants list as well as we go along. Yes, Pragya, Navya.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Shaowen said. Thank you so much for having us here. We've really learned a lot. Even the questions you asked in the group chat, they're very, very relevant. So if you have solutions also that we can, you know, use, or ideas or anything that you think that will help us, please leave it via the survey link that I shared on the chat, and happy to have any follow-up conversations with anyone if needed, and also happy to share any research we've done that can benefit any of your work so far. So yeah, I'm really grateful. Thank you so much for having us, Professor, and really, really grateful for being here today. Thank you.
Yes, pretty much what Pragya said, she summed up how we're feeling, but thank you so much for, you know, having us here and letting us speak. That we learned so much from all the earlier talks as well. And like Pragya mentioned, we hope that we can use that and put it into our work and learn from everything that was spoken about today. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. A quick mention for our next session. We're going to be focusing on mental health. So I think some of it is going to actually focus on the issues that you all brought up in your last presentation, accessing mental health in different geographies. We have 3 confirmed speakers. As soon as we have our 4th speaker confirmed, we will share that information with you all. So that will be in about a month. We do have a few folks helping us with organizing. If you're interested in organizing a session, we can absolutely talk about that. We've been talking about kind of what to do after the next session as well. Anything else? Akhil, do you want to add anything?
No, I think you've covered pretty much. I will just add that we are also very open to having more organizers join in. And if you are interested in this area of global development and want to propose a new topic for discussion, please reach out to us and we can work together to set up another session like that.
And if you want to join our group, you know, we can let me know via email or anyone else. We have a Google group that we've been keeping, and we'll share this recording as well on the website. thank you again, Catherine, for letting us use the Zoom. All right, see you next month.
Thank you, Neha. This was great.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you,
you, Nassim and Shaowen and Catherine and Navya and Pragya. Thank you.